Before we dive into today's journey, have you ever experienced something strange while out camping? Share your story in the comments below, and let's build this haven of eerie campfire tales together. It started with a sound I didn't recognize, that kind of silence just before something changes, the kind you feel in your bones, not your ears. I was somewhere between nowhere and not yet lost, winding through a sliver of highway on the edge of New Mexico. I'd been driving for 5 hours since the last gas station, chasing a promise I made to myself a few years ago to finally break free from the cities, the phones, the grind. To finally camp the old way. Just me, my '73 Volkswagen Westphalia, and whatever story the road wanted to tell me next. My name's Eli, 37. A photographer by trade, though that work dried up last winter. I guess I stopped seeing things the way clients wanted me to. That's when I turned back to the road, something I used to love before the jobs and expectations weighed everything down. I had a route planned, carefully picked out campsites, gas stops, even diners that still served pie that wasn't frozen. But when I saw the faded brown sign that simply said, Raven's Rest, 2 miles, something in me pulled right. The kind of pull you can't name, the kind you ignore until you regret it. I should have kept driving. I know that now. The road to Raven's Rest was narrow and cracked, like the earth was trying to reclaim it. Grass pushed up through the seams and the trees pressed close on both sides, heavy with a kind of stillness that felt too deliberate. My headlights hit a deer skull nailed to a fence post as I passed, and even though I'd seen worse on the road, that one felt ceremonial, like a warning no one bothered to translate. When the trees opened up, I saw the sign again. Same name, older wood, and below it, dangling on rusted chain links, closed permanently. Trespassers will be prosecuted. But there was no gate, no locks, no one. The campground sat quiet beneath a fading sky. Rows of empty RV lots, cracked concrete pads where families probably barbecued once. I parked the Volkswagen near what used to be the check-in kiosk. Half the roof was caved in, and the windows were shattered, like it had been hit by a storm that never ended. A bird had built a nest where the price list used to be. Still, I got out. I told myself it was just for a few photos, just to explore. A harmless detour. I walked with my camera slung around my neck, but I didn't take a single shot. Something about the place didn't want it to be captured. I remembered the heat first, not the sun, but something heavier, like the air was holding its breath. No bugs, no wind, just heat pressing in from all sides as if the place had been vacuum sealed in time. I passed a row of tilted picnic tables, some overgrown with moss. Then I saw the first abandoned RV. It was an old Airstream, silver, dented, covered in grime. But what chilled me was the fact that the door was still open, just hanging there, slightly ajar, creaking back and forth like it was waiting for someone to return. I don't know why I stepped inside. Maybe because I wanted to believe people just leave things behind sometimes. That maybe someone got tired of the road, left the keys on the counter, and walked into a new life. But inside, it didn't feel like someone left. It felt like they disappeared. The place was untouched. Coffee mug still in the sink, a flannel jacket draped over the booth seat, a calendar on the wall marked July 1996. No names. No notes, just an X over every day until the 19th. That's the day they stopped marking. The further I stepped in, the more the air changed. There was a faint smell, sweet, rotten, metallic. I covered my mouth, scanned for animals. Nothing. The silence felt surgical, like the whole RV had been carved out of the world and left to rot in a bubble of still time. Then I heard it. 3 knocks. Sharp. Even. Not outside. From the back of the RV, I froze. I don't care how many horror movies you've watched. Nothing prepares you for the moment when you hear a sound you know shouldn't be there in a place that shouldn't be occupied. Hello? I called out. My voice didn't echo. It just stopped, like the walls swallowed it. 3 more knocks. Same rhythm. I backed out, heart pounding, hands trembling. When I stepped outside, everything looked the same. Too the same. I ran back to the Westphalia, threw the door open, sat behind the wheel trying to slow my breathing. And that's when I saw it. Across the lot, maybe 30 yards away, was another RV. Not abandoned, clean, too clean. Its door was open, a yellow porch light flickered on and off, and something stood just inside the frame. I could barely make it out, but I swear it was watching me. The figure didn't move, didn't shift, didn't breathe. I turned the ignition. It coughed once, twice, then stalled. The figure stepped forward, just one step. Still too far to make out its face, but enough to know I wasn't alone. Enough to know it had been waiting for me. I turned the key again, the engine roared to life, and I peeled out, gravel spitting behind me. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just drove faster than I should have, faster than the road allowed, until the trees blurred and the air cleared and my lungs remembered how to breathe. When I reached the highway again, I didn't stop. I didn't eat. I didn't take photos. I just drove. For hours. The next night, I parked at a KOA in Arizona, surrounded by kids on bikes and parents grilling hot dogs. The world felt normal again, but something inside me wasn't. That night, I sat in the van with my journal, trying to make sense of what I saw, what I felt. I wanted to believe it was just nerves, just paranoia from being alone too long. But then I opened the glove box to grab my pen. And inside, where I kept my spare flashlight, was a folded sheet of paper I'd never seen before. One sentence, written in red ink. Why did you leave the door open? I sat there for 10, maybe 15 minutes, just staring at that sentence. Why did you leave the door open? I must have read it 30 times, trying to convince myself it wasn't what it clearly was, a message meant for me, not something I found by accident, not a flyer or brochure, not left by a previous owner. It was new. Sharp creases, fresh ink, no dust, and worse, my glove box had been locked. I remember the way the plastic crinkled as I unfolded it again. I even held it up to the light, looking for watermarks or fingerprints or a punchline, but there was nothing funny about it. That question, why did you leave the door open, felt like a trap, like whoever wrote it already knew the answer and just wanted to see if I did too. That night, I locked the van from the inside. Every door, every window. I slept with the flashlight in one hand and a pocket knife in the other. I didn't even change into sleep clothes. I just lay there on the bench seat, fully dressed, waiting for the sound, but nothing came. The next morning was warm, clean, forgettable. A woman walked her beagle past my sight and waved. A teenager kicked a soccer ball against the fence. For a minute, I thought maybe I dreamed it all. Maybe the paper wasn't there. Maybe I was exhausted and cracked open from too many lonely miles, but when I started the engine and reached for the map tucked under the visor, I found another note. Different handwriting, sloppier. And this one was written in pencil, almost like it had been scratched down in haste. Do not go back. Now I was scared in a different way, not jump scare fear, not ghost story fear. This was targeted fear, personal, like someone had chosen me. Like someone was playing with the line between what I thought I controlled and what I actually didn't. I crumpled the paper and drove. For the next week, I stuck to state parks, crowded ones, loud ones, kids, dogs, the distant hum of RV generators, sounds that suddenly felt like protection. I smiled at strangers, took photos of the same dumb trees from different angles, tried to convince myself I was still just a guy on the road, chasing peace. But peace isn't a destination. You can't outrun the things that follow quietly. That second note, it followed me. I'd see it in my mind every time I opened the glove box or reached for the visor. Every empty highway rest stop started to feel like a test. Every slow knock of a branch against the van at night made my heart jump. And then 6 days later, I got curious. I shouldn't have. I knew better. But sometimes fear doesn't push you away. It pulls you back, makes you want to look under the bed, just to be sure. I pulled off in Utah, an unmarked dirt road off Highway 24, not even on Google Maps. Just a memory someone once told me about, a ghost campground near a place called Bluff Hollow. They said it was a failed KOA built on private land, shut down fast in the 90s after a string of disappearances. I didn't even remember who told me. Might have been a gas station clerk, Might have been my own curiosity inventing stories. But I went. The road was so rough it rattled the dishes in the cabinet. My Westie groaned with every pothole like it was protesting. And maybe it was. Maybe that van was smarter than me. The trees were thinner here, and the hills were baked in rust and dust. No one around for miles. When I finally reached the clearing, I stopped the van and killed the engine. Silence. Not like the peaceful kind you get on a clear night in the desert. This was the silence that watches, the kind that waits for you to speak first. The campground was barely recognizable, just 4 RV pads half swallowed by sand and time, a crumbling stone fire pit in the middle, and off to the left, a trailer, different from before, smaller, blue and white, paint peeling, windows blacked out with what looked like old towels, and the door was open, not wide, just enough to say, "You're welcome to try." I didn't want to go in. I didn't even want to get out of the van, but I felt it again, that pull, that sick magnetic ache in my gut like gravity had shifted. I grabbed my flashlight, left the van running. Each step toward that trailer felt heavier than the last, like I was wading through someone else's memory. The wind had picked up just enough to whisper nonsense through the sagebrush. And I kept hearing this clicking sound, like fingernails on plastic, repeating, pausing, repeating again. I stepped up onto the first creaking stair of the trailer, and the clicking stopped. Inside, it was dark, but not pitch black. Just enough light through the towel-covered windows to see outlines, a couch, a table, a bookshelf full of rotting paperbacks. The air smelled of mildew and something sharp, bleach maybe, or ammonia. Then I saw them, notes, dozens of them, taped to the walls. The ceiling, the cabinets, all handwritten, some neat, some frantic, a few crumpled and smoothed flat again. All of them asking questions. Do you remember the sound? Why are you the only one left? Don't speak its name. Where is your shadow? My heart was thundering. I stepped deeper in, brushing against a hanging string of paper cranes. Someone had lived here, not long ago. Maybe not alone. I took one photo, just one, a close-up of the notes. But when I looked at the preview on my camera screen, it was black, no image, just static like an old TV between channels. And then came the whisper, not a voice, not words, but a whisper. The texture of breath behind me, like someone leaning close to speak, but choosing silence instead. I turned. Nothing. I backed out. Fast. I didn't run, not yet, but I walked like something was behind me. I could feel it. Not chasing, just following, just reminding me I'd been seen. When I reached the van, the engine was off. I never turned it off. The keys were in the ignition just as I'd left them, but cold. I turned them. Nothing. Second try. Still nothing. The third time, it started coughing like it had just woken from a nightmare. I floored it down the path, fishtailing through dust and scrub brush, not caring about the noise or the rocks or whether I tore off the bumper. And in the rearview mirror, just for a second, I saw it. The blue and white trailer door, it was closed, not slammed shut. Gently. As if someone inside had finally gotten what they wanted. I drove until I didn't know where I was anymore. Somewhere past midnight, I pulled off at a rest stop outside of Cortez. Just a patch of pavement, a single flickering light, and the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. I parked beneath the lamp, engine still running, and just sat there, staring at the steering wheel like it might explain something. Every bone in me felt off, not tired, tilted. I didn't eat, didn't sleep. I didn't even get out to stretch my legs. I just kept my hand near the ignition and my eyes on the mirrors. The next morning, I woke up slumped against the driver's door. The van was off. I don't remember turning it off. I don't remember sleeping. But the note was back. This time it was pinned to my dashboard with a rusted nail. No tape, no magnet, a nail. It simply said, "Don't bring it farther." That's when it hit me. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't bound to a place. It was following. I started thinking about that first RV park, Raven's Rest, the open door, the knocking, that figure in the doorway of the clean RV. It hadn't been a thing. It had been the thing, watching, waiting. I'd left the door open, not just to the trailer, but maybe to it. I'd stepped into its space, breathed its air, touched the time it had twisted, and brought part of it back with me, like a parasite or a passenger. Back on the road, every mile felt heavier than the last. The van didn't feel like mine anymore. It smelled different, wet wool, old metal, and something faintly sweet, like the air in an antique shop that hasn't been opened in decades. I started noticing things. Little things at first. Shadows that didn't belong to anything. A subtle flicker in the rearview mirror. The sound of breathing when I wasn't moving. I told myself it was just my imagination, that sleep deprivation plays tricks. But deep down, I knew better. I drove to a mechanic just outside of Flagstaff, told him the van had been stalling and that something felt off. He was a lanky guy in his 50s, all gray stubble and oil-stained fingers, friendly enough. But after 20 minutes of poking under the hood, he stepped back, wiped his hands, and asked me, "Where'd you get this van?" I said I'd had it for years. He just nodded and said, "Something's been living in here. You know that, right?" I laughed, nervous, unsure. "Like a mouse or something?" "No," he said. "No mouse leaves a nest in the ventilation system. Whatever it was, it chewed straight through the ducting to get in, not out." He showed me what he found, a torn section of tubing just behind the glove box. Inside it were scraps of what looked like paper and fabric. But when I looked closer, it wasn't fabric. It was skin, translucent, thin, like something had shed. I left without waiting for repairs. By then, I had stopped trying to explain things. Fear does that to you. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just leans closer slowly until it's the only thing you can feel. That night, I made camp just outside of Sedona, near a ridge where the rocks glow red in the last light of day. I parked in a designated site, put up the blackout curtains, lit sage I'd bought from a roadside vendor 2 towns back, and I said out loud, "You're not welcome here." I repeated it again and again, and for the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. No whispers, no notes, no knocking. But when I woke up, I found something worse. Outside the van, in the dirt just beneath the driver's side window, were footprints, bare, human, but not mine, too long, too narrow. The toes ended in sharp points like they had grown wrong, mutated. They circled the van once, then stopped. No trail in, no trail out, like it had just appeared. I checked my locks, still engaged. I checked the vents, still taped shut from the inside. I didn't move for hours. I sat there in the front seat, gripping the wheel, watching the woods, trying to figure out if I had gone completely insane or if this was just what the road gives you when you stop listening. It's easy to romanticize isolation until you realize you've become a signal for something else, something that doesn't need roads or rules. And here's what chilled me most. It didn't want to kill me. It wanted me to understand, to see it, to carry it, and maybe to become like it. That night, I drove without direction. I didn't care where I ended up. I just needed to move, to prove I could, that I still had will, that I hadn't given it all away to something I met in an empty place where people once laughed around fires. Somewhere past midnight, I passed a billboard on the side of the highway, one of those old-timey ones that used to advertise roadside diners or campsites. It had been repainted, sloppily. Over the original message in huge red letters, someone had written, "You can't drive away from what you opened." And then I knew. This wasn't about Raven's Rest. It wasn't about the trailer. It wasn't about a single abandoned RV park. It was about what they were built on, the forgotten, the buried, the grief soaked into wood and plastic and aluminum, places people vanished not from, but into, places that remember you long after you forget them. I pulled over, took out my journal, and I started writing, not to tell a story, to confess, because maybe if I spoke the truth out loud, it would lose its grip. Maybe if I told someone, anyone, what I saw, what I carried, what I invited in, it wouldn't follow the next person who parked in a crooked lot with the door left just barely open. So I'm telling you now, not to scare you, not to entertain, but to warn. There are places in this country that the maps forgot on purpose. Abandoned parks, broken gates, trails that end without reason. And if you find one, if your van slows on its own, if you hear 3 knocks, if the air smells just a little too sweet, if the silence wraps around you like a question, don't answer, don't explore, don't enter, and for the love of whatever holds your soul together, close the door. I didn't close the door, not really. I tried, after the billboard, after the footprints, after the second voice in my own thoughts that wasn't mine. I tried to shut it all out. Burn sage, pray, delete the GPS logs, even avoid the mirrors for a few days. But I'd left it open the moment I crossed into that first campground and told myself it's just another place. That's the lie that gets people. It's never just another place. There are locations that wait, not for visitors, not for victims, but for recognition. Places that remember what you've forgotten about yourself. The weak parts, the wounds, the cracks that let something else in. So when I tell you about the last place I camped, know this. I wasn't running anymore. I was circling the drain. It was in Nevada, just north of Ely. The land there is barren, pale as bone, like someone stripped all the color from the world. I'd heard whispers about it on an old ham radio station, just static and muttered phrases like the last hookup and unlisted pad, and then that same line again, don't bring it farther. But I brought it anyway. I don't remember choosing the site. I only remember finding it, like it was already inside me, guiding the wheel. It didn't have a name, no gate, no sign, just 4 ancient concrete pads lined in a perfect cross, surrounded by desert brush that hadn't moved in the wind for days. I parked in the northernmost spot. The sky was flat, not cloudy, just featureless, like even the sun didn't want to look at me. I didn't set up camp, I didn't cook. I didn't even check the cabinets. I just sat in the driver's seat with the windows up and the key out of the ignition, waiting for the thing that had followed me to make its move. The air was still, but the van began to sway back and forth, gently, as if something huge walked past in slow circles, its weight shifting the earth underneath. But there were no footsteps, no sound, only the soft creak of old suspension. And then, the knocking. But not on the door this time. It came from underneath. 3 slow, deliberate knocks from beneath the floor of the van, as if something was inside the ground and had finally reached up far enough to say, let me finish. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run into the open and let whatever waited in the dust take me whole. But I didn't. I stayed seated. Because fear does weird things to a man. Sometimes it makes you flee. Other times it makes you listen. The knocking stopped. And then the glove box opened by itself. Not a slam, not forced. Just a casual click, like someone who lived here had returned to their own home. Inside, folded into the same paper I'd seen before, was a small, brittle photo. Not mine. Black and white. Faded. It showed an RV park. This RV park. Same pads, same formation, but full. 4 large campers, 1950s style, and 5 people standing in the center, arms around each other, faces smiling, half-faded with age. I looked closer. One of them looked like me. Not exactly. But the face, the build, the posture, the scar on the left brow, it was close enough to make my stomach twist, like finding a mirror in a stranger's attic. And on the back of the photo, scrawled in shaky graphite, "You finally came back." I dropped it. I reached for the ignition, desperate to leave, but the key wouldn't turn. The radio turned on, but there was no music, just a low hum, deep, subsonic, like a machine thinking in a forgotten language, and layered under it, voices, dozens, hundreds, whispering all at once. I heard my name. I heard it wrong, like a version I hadn't used in lifetimes, and then one voice rose above the rest, not loud, but clear, female, warm. "You said you'd only stay a night." And that's when I remembered something I'd never known. I'd been here before. Not in this life, not in this body maybe, but the land remembered. The pads, the wind, the silence, they all knew me. The thing that had followed me wasn't chasing me at all. It was leading me back to this place, to this moment. And all it had ever asked was that I remember. I don't remember starting the van, but I do remember driving, fast, no direction, just away. But there's no away anymore. Now when I stop to sleep, if I sleep, I hear them again. The knocks, the voice, the click of the glove box, even when it's empty. I've changed the locks, switched vehicles, burned every map, but sometimes in the morning there's a layer of dust on the dash, a dry desert smell in the vents, and one small note left without a sound. You're still parked here. And I realize this isn't about roads, it never was. It's about recognition. Memory that doesn't belong to you but lives in your shadow. And once it finds its way in, you never really leave. Because the haunting doesn't happen at the campground. It happens inside the driver. There's a place inside me now that hums like an engine that never turns off. Even when I'm still, it's running, whispering, reminding. Every rest stop I pull into feels temporary, like I'm not really allowed to stay. Every new campsite feels like a repeat of something I've already lived, just rearranged. Like I'm stuck in a loop I can't see from the inside. But the weirdest part, no one else ever sees it. They don't see the marks in the dirt outside the van. They don't smell the scorched metal scent that hits after dusk. They don't feel the temperature shift or hear the way the birds go silent 2 minutes before sunset. They look at me and see a guy in a Volkswagen living the dream, and I play along, because what else am I going to do? Try to explain that I'm haunted by a location? Try to explain that I'm not scared of ghosts, I'm scared of memory, of old places that remember me more clearly than I remember myself? They'd laugh, or worse, they'd nod politely and say, "That's deep, man," and go back to roasting marshmallows. But you, I hope you're listening for real. I hope you're not just here for the thrill, because this isn't fiction. This is a warning. There are parks out here, real parks, with real GPS coordinates buried in the bones of America that people don't talk about anymore. RV pads that haven't been listed on maps for 40 years, sometimes longer. Places that were shut down not because of money or zoning or weather, but because something opened. I think that's what I really learned out there. It's not that abandoned places are dangerous. It's that we're dangerous to them. We bring presence, energy, attention. We shine a light where there was only forgetting. And sometimes the thing buried in that forgetting doesn't want to be remembered. Sometimes remembering is how it finds you. And then it just waits. It doesn't stalk you. It doesn't scream. It doesn't need to. It just sits in the back of your memory like an open browser tab you forgot was playing audio. Always there. Always draining. Always whispering. Some days I think about going back. Not because I want to. Because I feel like I have to. There's this idea that if you return to the place where it all began, you can undo the damage, make peace, close the loop. But I know better. You don't close the loop by returning. You become the loop by refusing to let go. And somewhere in that dry, cracked campground in Nevada, there's still an open spot. The fourth pad, the one facing north, mine, still waiting. I know because I see it sometimes. Not physically, in dreams, in flashes. In the reflection of the windshield when I drive past long stretches of nothing. It's always there, clean, untouched, like it's been reserved. And the van pulls just slightly to the right when I pass exit signs that don't match the map. That's the last trick this thing plays. It doesn't try to take you. It waits until you offer, until your fear becomes curiosity, until your wariness becomes surrender, until the knocking stops and you miss it. And that's when it knows you're ready. That's when you find your way back without realizing you ever turned around. It almost happened to me last week. I was driving through Utah, long, hot stretch of road between nowhere and nowhere else. My gas light was on. I pulled off at a station that didn't have a name, just a number, 103. No pumps, no people. But there was a gravel path behind the building, freshly smoothed, like someone had just driven down it. No signs, no warnings, just that subtle nudge, the thought, you could rest, just for a little. And I felt it again, that low-frequency hum in the steering wheel, the one I thought I'd left behind, but I didn't turn. I kept driving, because I remembered something. The farther you go doesn't mean the farther you get. Sometimes the only way to move forward is to admit what followed you, to name it, to warn the next one. So this is me doing that. Not because I think you'll believe every detail, but because if even one person out there sees a broken down RV park and feels the hair on their arms rise, if you hear a knock you can't explain or see a door open that should have been locked, I want you to know you're not crazy. You're not alone. You're just too close. And if you keep going, if you ignore every instinct and every echo, if you stop just for a night and convince yourself it's just a coincidence, then maybe you'll find what I found, and maybe you won't leave. Because the truth is, some parks aren't abandoned. They're waiting. And some stories don't end. They just get retold through different voices, different vans, different people who think they're just camping, just exploring, just getting off the grid until they realize the grid never let go of them. So next time you're driving through the high desert or deep woods or open fields with no signal, listen closely. Watch for places that feel too quiet. And if you hear 3 knocks, don't open the door. Drive. Even if the road makes no sense, even if the air changes, even if you feel something in the back seat leaning forward to whisper, "You came back." Keep going, because the further you get from remembering, the closer you get to freedom. I've only broken silence twice about what happened in the Kaibab National Forest back in '99. The first time was in court, sworn testimony, face like stone, fingers trembling under the table. The second time is now. And God help me, this is the only time I'll tell the full truth. I wasn't just some weekend ranger playing dress up. I was federal, 10 years in, stationed along the North Rim. My Volkswagen Westphalia was my second skin, pale green with rust flaking near the wheel wells and curtains my mom stitched herself. I practically lived in that van during the dry seasons. It was freedom. Open roads, pine air, and 100,000 acres of sky to patrol. But that summer broke something I didn't know could break. I was 32 then, young enough to think I could outwalk anything with teeth, old enough to carry regrets in my glove box. You learn early that the woods don't care who you are. They only echo what you bring with you. July of '99 started like any other monsoon season. Hot days, sudden storms, and the kind of eerie stillness that makes even the cicadas hold their breath. I remember it so clearly because that was the first summer we had to put up signs warning campers about sudden behavioral shifts in wildlife. Not attacks, not sightings, just shifts. We had coyotes howling at noon and elk walking in circles till their legs gave out. We blamed the heat or drought or maybe some unseen disease carried on the wind. But the truth was worse. The campers came in late July, a group of 4, 2 couples, maybe mid-20s, real free-spirited types with matching sandals and a cherry red Volkswagen Eurovan that looked like it had never seen mud. One of the guys, Sam, was local, Flagstaff-born, proud of it. The other 3 were from Oregon or Washington, somewhere that smelled like coffee and rain. They weren't reckless. I want you to understand that. They registered properly, filled out the paperwork, asked about bears. One of the girls, Jenna, asked me if there were any cool abandoned mines nearby. I laughed and told her to stay away from anything that had a fence or a weird smell. She laughed back. She had this way of smiling with only one side of her mouth, like the other half was still waiting to see if you deserved it. They chose Site 9 off Forest Road 211, a beautiful clearing with a distant view of the canyon edge. No cell service, but that was part of the appeal. I warned them about the sudden storms and handed them a radio, told them to check in every 2 days. They promised they would. But by the 3rd day, the silence started to throb in the back of my skull like a toothache. Now, campers miss check-ins all the time. It's usually nothing. Burned out batteries, lost track of time, hungover from too much campfire whiskey. But something gnawed at me. Something about the way the animals had been acting. The silence of the forest that week, it wasn't peace. It was like the land was holding its breath, waiting. I loaded up the Westphalia and drove out at dawn. The air was strange, heavy like wet wool. Even the sky looked wrong. Yellow-gray clouds stretched low across the horizon, too smooth, too still. I remember reaching Site 9 and expecting to find the usual mess: beer cans, burnt marshmallows, a forgotten hoodie. But what I found wasn't a campsite. It was an absence. No fire pit, no trash, no chairs, not even footprints. The whole site had been erased like someone took a sponge to it. But the van was still there, parked just slightly off the trail with both sliding doors open. I don't scare easy, but standing there, staring at that wide-open van, I felt something crawl behind my ribs. A kind of quiet nausea, like my body knew something my mind hadn't caught up with. I called out, once, twice. Nothing but the wind and some distant creaking, like trees bending under a weight you couldn't see. I approached slowly, hand resting on the grip of my sidearm, which I hadn't drawn in over a year. I looked inside. The van was neat, too neat. 4 sleeping bags, zipped, flashlights stacked on the dash, a notebook open to a sketch of trees, drawn in frantic, looping strokes like someone had been trying to draw faster than their hand could move. And then I saw it under one of the sleeping bags. A clump of hair. Human. Long. Black. I backed out slowly and radioed it in, requesting backup. Protocol, even though I knew no one would reach me for hours. And still I waited. I waited because something told me not to leave. Like the forest had turned inward, folding in on itself, and I was already inside its mouth. A few hours passed before I heard something. It wasn't footsteps. It wasn't shouting. It was humming, off-key, childlike. A tune I didn't recognize, but it made my skin pebble instantly. I turned toward the sound and saw a figure walking the edge of the clearing. Not running, not wandering, walking straight, deliberate, slow. It was Sam, but it wasn't Sam. His shirt was torn, eyes vacant. He had something smeared across his jaw, looked like ash or dirt, and he was humming, over and over. Same melody, no words. He didn't look at me, just walked past like I was another rock or tree. I called out his name. He stopped. And then he smiled. But that smile, it wasn't human. It was wide, too wide, stretched like something inside him had forgotten how faces work. And his teeth? God, his teeth looked too small. Baby teeth. I took a step back and he started walking again, right into the woods, not looking back once. I didn't follow. I couldn't. Every part of my gut screamed, don't. So I waited until backup arrived. 2 rangers and 1 sheriff's deputy. We searched the woods for 2 days, found Jenna's shoe 50 yards from a dry creek bed, neatly placed on a flat stone, found a torn page from a journal wedged between 2 branches. Don't look at the trees too long, it said. No bodies, no blood, just remnants. Like the woods had taken what it wanted and returned what it didn't need. They ruled it a missing persons case. Said the campers probably got lost, maybe fell into the canyon. Never mind that their van was untouched. Never mind Sam's dead-eyed humming or Jenna's shoe sitting like an offering. They buried it. And I buried it too, for a while. But something in me twisted that day, like a root coiled around the base of my spine. I stopped sleeping outside, sold the Westphalia 6 months later, transferred to desk duty by the following spring. But even then, sometimes I'd wake up at 2 a.m. and swear I heard humming beneath the floorboards. I kept one thing, though. The notebook from the van. I wasn't supposed to, but I did. And there's one page I look at more than the rest. A sketch of a tree, simple, crooked, with a hollow like an open mouth. And underneath, in frantic scribble, it's not the forest that's haunted, it's the space between the trees. I tried to forget. For years, I told myself it was grief that made me see Sam that way. That trauma distorts memory. That maybe the humming was just in my head, a reflex of the fear already growing there. But memory doesn't fade the way people think. It sharpens, distills. It becomes a flavor in the back of your throat. And in those quiet years, I tasted that moment every time I stepped outside at dusk. I stayed in admin, far from the woods, paperwork, budgets, reports. I convinced myself it was better this way. Safe, rational. But the forest, she doesn't let you go just because you stopped walking among her trees. It was the winter of 2005 when I heard the name again. A seasonal ranger named Kelly burst into the break room one morning, her face pale beneath her beanie, said she'd gotten a distress call on the old emergency channel. the one no one used anymore. Something about a van abandoned out on Forest Road 211. I stopped chewing, swallowed hard. "What kind of van?" I asked, my voice lower than I meant it to be. She flipped open her logbook. Didn't say make, just that it was older, faded green or blue, sliding doors open like someone left in a hurry. I excused myself and went to the archive room, hands sweating despite the cold. I hadn't touched the notebook in years, but I opened it again, thumbed through pages of uneven lines, desperate sketches, half sentences. That page again. The tree with the hollow. "It listens," someone had written below the roots, "but it doesn't speak until you're inside it." That night, I drove out to the edge of the forest, not because I believed I'd find the same van, not even because I wanted answers. I drove because part of me already knew I would never escape what I left behind. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't file a patrol log. Just packed a small bag, my flashlight, and my old sidearm, the same one I hadn't fired since '99. I took the agency Jeep, but before I hit the unpaved road, I turned back. Something made me pull around, head to the old Ranger lot behind my house. The Westphalia was gone, sold years ago, but I still had one of the old curtain panels. I stuffed it in my coat pocket. Forest Road 211 hadn't changed. The rocks still jostled your bones in the same pattern. The trees still leaned just slightly toward the trail, like they were always waiting for something to come home. Or maybe to come back. As I approached Site 9, the headlights caught something reflective. It was a license plate, and the shape around it, a boxy shell of chipped teal blue paint, hit me like a memory dredged up too fast. A van. Not the same one from '99, no, but close. Too close. Same make, same era. A '94 Eurovan, maybe. Doors swung wide as if opened by invisible hands. One of them creaked softly in the breeze. I parked 30 feet away, left the engine running. I stepped out, boots crunching softly over gravel and pine needles. The air smelled strange again. Not rotten, not quite, but full of electricity, like a thunderstorm hiding in the dirt. I approached the van, flashlight cutting through the dark. It was empty. At least, visibly, no bags, no food wrappers, no gear. But on the far seat, laid neatly like an offering, was a pair of sunglasses and a page torn from a field notebook. I picked it up. My hands were already shaking. It was a sketch, not of trees, not of a person. It was a hole. Round, black, textured with rings that looked almost like bark, but not quite. It had depth, too much depth, and underneath it, in neat, deliberate script, it hums back now. I backed away, heart hammering, not panic yet, but close. I could feel it rising in me like water pressing against a dam too old to hold. Then I heard it, soft, low, low. A hum from the woods behind me, that same broken melody Sam had hummed. I turned, flashlight shaking, beams scattering off trunks and branches in the awful, endless black between them, and something moved. Too slow to be wind, too tall to be human. A shadow sliding between the pines, not walking, not exactly. Gliding, the way a ripple moves across still water. I ran, not back to the Jeep, but sideways, down the old dry creek bed I remembered from that first search in '99. My boots slipped, cracked into stone, and I tumbled once before catching myself. Breathing hard, I crouched behind a boulder, listening. The hum faded, but not entirely. It lingered, thin as wire, threading through the trees like a thing with teeth. I waited. 10 minutes. Maybe 20. When I finally moved, I moved low and quiet, like the old days. But something had changed. The woods didn't sound like woods anymore. There were no crickets, no rustle of deer, no distant owl call, just the low buzz of trees existing. And then I realized what it was. It wasn't that there were no animals. It was that the forest was listening, as if every pine and spruce had ears turned toward me. I made it back to the Jeep and drove fast, tires spinning in the dirt, heart hammering so loud I thought it might burst through the glass. I didn't report what I saw. I couldn't. Who would believe it? Even I barely did, and I was the one who felt the weight of that hum in my chest for the next 3 nights straight. I stayed away from Site 9 after that. Tried to tell myself it was just coincidence. That the forest plays tricks, that trauma echoes in shapes and smells. But then the hikers went missing, 3 of them, all under 30, 2 men, 1 woman. Spotted entering Kaibab from the South Trail in early June 2006. They were supposed to do a 3-day loop. Never checked in. Helicopters searched for 6 days, found nothing. Except one thing. A campsite with no fire pit, no trash, and a single page from a journal nailed to a tree with a twig. Some places, it said, don't echo your voice, they echo your fear. That broke something in me. Not just because it was too similar, but because the handwriting was Jenna's. I know because I still had her old field journal in a drawer. Same slant, same looped Y's and open A's. She would have been gone 7 years by then. But there it was. Fresh ink. As if she'd written it yesterday. That was the moment I accepted it. Something was wrong in that forest. Not a ghost, not a creature. Something older. Something that doesn't live in the woods. Something that is the woods or the breath between them. And it waits. It waits for people who don't just camp, but settle in. People who treat the land like home. People who stay long enough to listen. And once you listen long enough, it starts to listen back. I wish I could say I left it alone after that I let the woods keep its secrets and moved on like any sane man would. But something was already growing inside me, a kind of pressure, a knowing. I started hearing things in my sleep, low chords of that broken hum bleeding into my dreams, pulling me back to that hollow tree I'd seen sketched in Jenna's notebook. I'd wake up with my heart racing, mouth dry, headlights from passing cars casting silhouettes on my bedroom wall that felt just a little too tall, a little too still. I told myself it was stress, leftover trauma, maybe even guilt. But the part that scared me most was that it didn't scare me like it should have. It called to me. The way the woods always called to me when I was young, when I believed in silence, in solitude, in space to breathe. But this was different. This was directional, like a compass that didn't point north anymore. By August 2006, I'd stopped pretending. I knew what I had to do. I packed for a multi-day solo trip, told the station I was going on personal leave, loaded an old topographical map, my sidearm, water, a field radio, and the one thing I hadn't touched since the first time I saw that hollow sketch, the curtain panel from the Westphalia. It still smelled faintly of sun-warmed fabric and campfire smoke. I don't know why I took it. I think I needed something from the time before the van sat empty. Something from the version of me that believed I understood the land. I reached Site 9 by sundown on the second day. The air was thick, not just with heat, but with something else. Like sound had weight. I didn't see any animals. Not a bird, not a beetle. Even the flies had abandoned the place. The moment I stepped out of the Jeep, I could feel the silence pressing in around me, like the whole forest had drawn in a breath and refused to let it go. There was no trace of the van this time, just me, the tall pines, and that overwhelming sense that I was not alone. I made camp at the edge of the clearing, just like I had when I first trained in these woods. I didn't light a fire, I didn't eat, I just sat in my tent with my boots still on, listening. Around midnight, I heard the humming. It came from deeper in the trees. Not loud, not menacing, just familiar. I picked up my flashlight and stepped out, every part of my body screaming not to. But something inside me had already decided. I walked for 10 minutes, then 20. The trees grew denser, the air colder, and that's when I saw it. Not a shadow, not a creature. A shape, too symmetrical to be natural. It looked like a tree, except it wasn't. It was taller, darker, no limbs, no leaves, just bark the color of wet ash, and at its center, a hollow. Not a knothole, a void, a perfect circle, like a tunnel punched through the trunk with invisible hands. I approached slowly, heart pounding in my throat, and that's when I smelled it. Not rot, not death. It was familiar. Charcoal, smoke. The way the curtains of the Westphalia smelled after a fire that never went out. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the panel, held it up, and that's when the hum stopped. Completely. As if something had turned off the forest. Not silenced it, just paused it, like the moment before a scream. I stepped closer to the hollow. There were no carvings, no runes, just that impossible blackness, so deep it felt like falling forward even as I stood still. I leaned in, and I heard it. Not a voice, not words, but a memory. My mother sewing the curtain panels at our old kitchen table, laughing. The sound of my first solo patrol, the gravel under my boots, the soft slam of the van door when I pulled into Site 9 for the first time. 1,000 moments layered on top of each other whispered back to me through the hollow. And then someone else's. Jenna's laugh, Sam's humming. A scream swallowed too quickly. The words, "Don't stay too long. Don't let it finish your name." I staggered back, breath ragged, curtain still clenched in my fist. The hollow, it wasn't just echoing me. It was learning me, and it was hungry. I turned to run. But the trees had changed. They were closer now, angled in, like ribs closing around a heart. I couldn't find the trail, couldn't even tell which way the sky was. Every direction looked the same, just tall trunks, endless black, and that damn hum rising again, this time from inside my own ears. That's when I started seeing the shapes. Tall figures, not quite trees, not quite people, standing too still, too silent, just beyond the reach of my light. Every time I turned, one vanished. Another appeared behind me, and the humming grew louder. Not one voice. Dozens. Hundreds. A chorus of memory and madness and grief, layered until my knees buckled and I collapsed in the dirt. I don't remember passing out, but I remember waking. Back at Site 9, just before dawn, my boots were off, my flashlight gone. But the curtain panel was folded neatly in my lap. There were footprints in the soil around me, barefoot, small, too many to count. I left without packing, drove straight to the ranger station, walked inside still covered in dirt, eyes wide, and handed over my badge. Didn't explain, didn't need to. They saw it in my face. The kind of look people only get when they've seen past the surface of the world and realize there's no bottom. I moved out of Arizona a month later, bought a small place in Oregon, still in the woods, but near a road, near people. I haven't gone camping since, haven't set foot inside a van. Some nights I leave all the lights on. Some nights I sleep in the closet. But every now and then I hear humming. Not in the woods. Not from outside. From me. Like something buried under my tongue has started remembering how to sing. I went to a therapist after Oregon. Tried to make sense of it, put it into words that didn't sound like madness. I said things like delusion, grief projection, and trauma-induced hallucination. The therapist nodded, jotted down notes, asked if I'd ever seen combat. No, I said. But I saw something older than war. That was the last time I went. What do you say to someone who's never heard the forest breathe your name? The nightmares didn't stop. They just got quieter, moved into the seams of the day. I'd find myself reaching for a flashlight at the grocery store, listening for wind patterns inside the hum of an air conditioner. One time, I smelled charcoal in a parking garage and nearly dropped to my knees. But for a while I lived. I built routine like armor, same route to work, same dinners, same music. Never jazz, never anything that might slide into that pattern. I learned to avoid curved tree trunks, hollowed logs, anything with a hole that could whisper. I was doing okay. Until last fall. I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Just my name, my full name, the way I hadn't heard it in years, the way Sam used to say it. Inside was a photo. Black and white, blurry, but I knew what it was. The hollow tree, the same impossible circle at the center. But this time, something was standing inside it. Not a person, not quite. It looked like a man made of ash, or a shadow burned into bark, too tall, no eyes, no mouth, just a shape looking outward like it had been waiting for the photo to be taken. And on the back, scrawled in handwriting I hadn't seen since 1999, "Do you remember the second night?" I dropped the photo. Couldn't breathe. Because that was the part I never told anyone. There was a second night in 1999. After we found the van, after we brought it back to the station, after Sam hummed that last broken note, I'd stayed up, pacing, and I heard him leave. I followed from a distance, silent, careful. He walked back to Site 9 like something was pulling him. I should have stopped him. But something told me it had to happen. That night I saw him step into the hollow, not inside the tree. into the hole like the forest folded around him. And when he came out, 10 minutes later, an hour, he was different. He didn't talk about what he saw. He just handed me a piece of his notebook, a sketch, and one word, listen. And I forgot. I forgot all of it until that photo arrived, until the whisper started again. A week later, I booked a ticket back to Arizona, back to the Kaibab. I didn't tell anyone. What could I say? I just packed a bag like I did 20 years ago. This time, no sidearm, no tent, just the curtain panel and the photo. I reached Site 9 just before dusk. It looked the same, quiet, still, wrong, but something had changed. I wasn't afraid. Not in the old way, not with panic and sweat and instinct. I was present. I stepped into the clearing, walked slowly to the center, and waited. And it came, the hum. Not distant this time. All around me, like the trees were tuning themselves. I knelt and placed the curtain in the dirt. Then the photo, and I said the words out loud. Do you remember the second night? The trees didn't move, but the air did, thickened, pressed against my back. And then I heard it, a footstep, behind me. I turned, and there he was. Sam. Or something that had been Sam. His face was pale, his eyes deeper than I remembered. But the smile, it was his. And for the first time, I saw it. He wasn't lost. He was changed. He knelt beside me, picked up the photo, turned it over, smiled again. You remembered. His voice sounded like wind through dry leaves. What is it? I asked. What was it that took them? He shook his head. Nothing took them. They followed. It shows you what you forget. That's the danger. I didn't understand. He pointed to the trees. All of this listens, but not to words, to memory, to weight, to truth. The campers, they brought something heavy, grief, secrets, lies. The woods don't like that. And the van, that was their door. They made it feel safe, like home. And once you make a place feel safe, you let it in, I whispered. He nodded. I looked around. The trees weren't watching anymore. They were waiting. I'm not staying, I said. You can't, he replied. Not anymore. You've remembered too much. I stood. He stayed kneeling, and I knew he couldn't leave. Whatever part of him came out of that hollow, it wasn't made for roads anymore. I left the curtain there, folded, clean, a relic of something pure. And as I walked away, the hum faded. Not because it stopped, because I stopped hearing it. That was 6 months ago. I've been back in Oregon ever since. Still don't sleep much, but I understand now. What killed those campers in 1999 wasn't a monster, wasn't a beast. It was what they carried. The grief they never spoke, the guilt they tried to bury, the fear they never looked at. The forest didn't take them. It reflected them. And some of them never looked away. There are places in this country, hidden, quiet, old, that don't belong to us. Places that listen more than they speak, and if you stay too long, they remember you. So if you ever find yourself deep in a campground that feels too quiet, if you hear humming that doesn't seem to come from anywhere, if the trees look a little too tall, too curved, too still, don't listen, don't answer. And whatever you do, don't step into the hollow. Because it's not about what's waiting in there. It's about what it remembers of you. I should have trusted the silence. It wasn't the peaceful kind, the type that settles in your bones when the fire crackles low and the pines sway just enough to hush your thoughts. No, this was the other kind. A silence that felt pressed down by something unseen. A silence that watched. It was mid-October when I pulled my old 1985 Volkswagen Westphalia up a winding trail deep in the Appalachian Mountains. The foliage was on fire with color. Flaming reds, golds, burnt oranges like the whole mountain had caught a slow, graceful blaze. I'd been chasing that fall magic for years, but this stretch near Black Balsam Knob in North Carolina was different, wilder, less touched. I'd found the site from a forum, some guy named Cliff88 who swore by its seclusion, said it was a hidden gem off the Blue Ridge Parkway. No tourists, just forest, sky, and quiet. I liked that. I was in a bad stretch of my life, a breakup that left me hollow, a job I'd left on bitter terms. I needed to be alone with my van, to feel the road again like it used to feel, free, without noise or grief. It took most of the day to get there. My van chugged faithfully up the steep dirt trail, tires crunching over fallen leaves. When I finally found the clearing, it looked like a dream. About 50 yards wide, lined with moss-covered boulders, ringed by fir trees so tall they made the sky feel like a ceiling. There was a fire ring, half collapsed and signs of an old trail winding deeper into the woods. No signal, no voices. No sound but wind and wing. Perfect. I parked the van, popped the top, and set up camp. Built a small fire, made coffee the way I always did. Stovetop mocha, tiny enamel mug, splash of oat milk. My ritual. That night, the stars looked like they had been poured straight onto the sky, heavy and close. I let the fire burn low, wrapped myself in my old army jacket, and felt, for the first time in months, like I might actually sleep. But the quiet wasn't right. It wasn't immediate. It crept in. First, the breeze died. Then the forest stilled. You don't notice how alive a forest is until it stops moving. No insects, no owl calls, no rustle of small things. It felt like the whole world had taken a breath and forgotten how to let it out. I chalked it up to elevation. Maybe the cold. Maybe I was just tired. I shut the van and locked the door from the inside, something I didn't usually do in the middle of nowhere. But my hands did it without me thinking, like muscle memory or instinct, like they knew something I didn't. I lay there in the van, staring at the roof, listening. That's when I heard the knock. It wasn't loud, just a soft, deliberate tap on the passenger window. 3 times. Tap, tap, tap. My chest seized. You know that feeling when adrenaline floods your system but you can't move yet? Like your body's still buffering the threat? I stayed frozen, counting my breaths. 1, 2, tap, 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 again. Same rhythm, same spot. I sat up, heart hammering. It was too dark to see out the windows. I reached slowly for my flashlight, but I didn't turn it on. I didn't want to light myself up like a beacon. I waited. Nothing. I don't know how long I sat like that. Could have been minutes. Could have been an hour. But eventually I convinced myself I imagined it. Maybe a branch had knocked against the glass. Maybe a raccoon was curious. I forced myself to lie back down, pulling the sleeping bag tight up to my chin. The 3rd time, it wasn't a knock. It was a breath. Slow, drawn out, fogging the glass from the outside. I heard it, and I felt it, hot and wet against the thin barrier of the window. My stomach turned. I didn't sit up this time. I stayed flat, barely breathing, eyes wide in the darkness. Something was out there, and it was watching me. I don't remember falling asleep. I think my body shut down from fear. But when I woke, it was morning. Bright. Too bright. The kind of light that feels like a mercy. I stumbled out of the van like I'd been trapped underwater. My breath came hard, and I scanned the clearing. Nothing. No footprints. No markings on the glass. I went around to the passenger side, heart still tight, and stared at the window. Clean. No fog, no smudge, but my gut twisted when I saw the inside of the glass. A handprint. Small, like a child's, pressed against the condensation. From the inside. My mouth went dry. I hadn't had anyone in the van. I hadn't even opened that side last night. I checked the doors. Still locked. Still sealed. I told myself it was a mistake, that maybe I had done it myself and forgotten, that maybe I was sleepwalking, grieving, unstable. I stayed another night. I shouldn't have. The 2nd day was colder. The trees felt different, too still. The clouds hung low, like they didn't want to rise. I made a fire again, tried to read, tried to cook something warm, but the weight was back, heavier now, like something under the soil was watching. At sunset, I walked a few hundred yards down that old trail just to clear my head. The forest felt dense, like it was listening. Every twig snap behind me made me jump. I never saw anything, but I felt it. That night, I didn't sleep. I heard footsteps, circling the van, slow, deliberate. Crunch, crunch, crunch. No flashlight, no sounds, just that sick rhythm of something pacing. I lay there, teeth clenched, fists balled up in my sleeping bag. I don't know why I didn't scream, why I didn't start the engine and drive, but I couldn't move. It was like fear had turned my body into stone. Around 3 a.m., the footsteps stopped. But I didn't sleep. When morning finally came, I opened the door and stepped out with shaking legs. There were no footprints, nothing disturbed, but on the side of the van, just above the wheel well, someone had scratched a word into the paint. Stay. That was the moment I realized I wasn't alone, that someone didn't want me to leave. My first instinct was to leave. I even reached for the keys. My hands shook as I turned them over in my palm, felt their familiar weight, that dull metal clink, but I didn't put them in the ignition. I just stood there, staring at that one word carved into the van's body. Stay. Deep enough to scrape through the paint. Not fresh, weathered almost, like it had always been there, waiting for the light to show it. I circled the van twice, half expecting to catch someone still nearby, crouching in the underbrush, watching from behind those dark green walls of pine. But there was nothing. No tracks, no scent, not even the usual skitter of squirrels or birds. The forest was silent again, too silent. And yet, I stayed. Not because I felt brave, not because I didn't believe what was happening, but because something in me needed to see it through. That same stubborn part of me that drove the van into the mountains to begin with, the part that couldn't bear to turn away from pain before it finished speaking. So I cleaned the van, packed up a few things in case I had to run but didn't leave. Instead, I took my axe, the heavy one I used for splitting kindling, and walked the trail deeper. It was stupid, I know, irrational, but I felt drawn, like something in the trees wanted me to follow. The trail narrowed quickly, winding between massive stones slick with moss. The trees grew thicker, closer. Their trunks bent unnaturally, like they'd grown in discomfort, twisted toward the center. The light dimmed fast, and I started to feel like I was walking into a mouth that never learned how to close. A mile in, I found the cabin. It wasn't on any map. It didn't look lived in. Just a square wooden shape, half sunken into the earth, with a collapsed porch and windows blackened with soot. The door stood open, like it had been waiting. The wind didn't move it. My stomach dropped the second I stepped on the porch. The air changed, got thick, wet, like breathing through cotton. I pushed the door open further and stepped inside. The smell hit first, something old, rotten, and sharp. Not death, something before death, like decay still in motion. The walls were covered in carvings, dozens, maybe hundreds, all hand-scratched with a knife or nail, layered over each other in chaotic patterns. Some were words, I saw her, no eyes, he knows, and others just scratched lines, circles, spirals that made my head throb to look at. But what made my blood run cold was the far wall. There was a drawing, done in what I swear was charcoal or ash, of a van, a VW Westphalia, just like mine, same color, same rust on the back bumper. Below it, one word, hiss. I backed out, heart racing, nearly tripping down the porch steps. The forest felt tighter now, like it was leaning in. The light was nearly gone, even though it wasn't yet evening. I could hear something distant, like breath, or maybe humming, low, too low to trace. But there, I ran. Didn't stop until I was back at the clearing, chest burning, sweat freezing on my back. The van sat untouched, but the driver's side door was open. I never leave it unlocked. Inside, everything was the same, except for one thing. On the driver's seat, placed carefully like a warning, was a photograph. It was old, sepia-toned, curled at the edges. A family stood in front of a cabin, a man, woman, and 2 children, all smiling, except the girl. She looked maybe 10, long dark hair, eyes wide and wrong, not afraid, not sad, just empty. And behind them in the trees there was a shape, faint, almost missed it. But the more I looked, the more I saw it. A figure, tall, gaunt, wearing something like a cloak made from bark and bone. No face, just the suggestion of one blurred and wrong, like the camera couldn't quite see it. But the shape was there, watching them, watching me. Because I swear, when I blinked, the figure was closer in the next moment. Just slightly, as if the photo itself had shifted. I dropped it, burned it in the fire that night, but I didn't leave, because something in me still didn't want to believe it. My rational mind kicked and screamed, tried to drag me back to reason, told me it was a prank, that someone else was camping nearby, that it was a messed up joke, maybe local kids screwing with outsiders, that the carvings, the scratches, the photo, it was all a coincidence. But at 2:41 a.m., I woke to screaming. A child's scream. It wasn't close. Not yet. It echoed through the trees, high and sharp and filled with something that didn't sound human. Pain and panic, but with an edge too clean. Like someone trying too hard to sound terrified. Like a copy of fear, not fear itself. I bolted upright. The fire had long since gone cold. The van was dark. I couldn't see anything out the windows. But the screaming got closer. Then it stopped. And in the silence that followed, something touched the back of the van. Just a thud. Not loud, but deliberate. Right against the paneling where my head had been resting. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I just waited. And then the whisper came. So quiet I thought it was my own breath at first, but it wasn't. It came from just beyond the glass, right against my ear. A girl's voice. Hollow. Measured. You're already his. My body locked up. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't even think. I sat there in that dark metal shell, feeling every molecule of air shift with something I couldn't see. I knew if I turned on the light, I'd see it, through the window, or inside the van. I waited until dawn. I don't even remember falling asleep, but the next thing I knew, light was pouring through the trees and I was slumped against the driver's seat, drenched in sweat. But the worst part wasn't the night. It was the note. When I stepped outside, there was a strip of leather nailed to a tree at the edge of the clearing. It had been branded with something, a symbol that looked like two antlers twisting into each other with a small figure beneath. And beneath the symbol, burned in clean, straight letters, "You can leave, but you won't." I don't remember packing. I only remember driving. Gravel shot out behind the tires as I tore down that narrow trail, windshield smeared with fog and dew, fingers locked around the wheel like a man gripping the edge of a cliff. My Westphalia rattled hard over every bump, suspension groaning, engine whining in second gear as the van dipped and surged along the mountain path. That thing nailed to the tree. I can't explain it. It wasn't just fear, it was recognition. Like my body knew that symbol before my mind could catch up. Like something old inside me had seen it once, long ago in a dream, or maybe in another life. I don't know. All I knew was I had to leave. But the road didn't make sense. It should have taken 20 minutes to reach the gravel lot where the trail had started, where I'd first turned off the parkway. But I drove for nearly an hour, heart thudding, eyes darting to the mirrors, still in the trees. Same bends, same rocky outcrops, same tree, the one with the split trunk and moss like a scarf down the side. I passed it 3 times. I wasn't moving forward. The road had looped. I pulled over, heart pounding, sweat slick beneath my shirt, and stepped out. The air was too still again. It had that same dead hush as before. No wind, no birds, only the hum. That low, vibrating hum I'd first heard in the cabin. It wasn't a sound exactly, more like a pressure in the chest, a pulse in the air. I could feel it in my teeth, and beneath it something else, something even quieter. Footsteps, not crashing through the brush, no twigs breaking, no heavy boots, just the light patter of bare feet on damp earth. Close. I turned fast, brandishing the hatchet I kept behind the driver's seat. But no one was there. No one. Just the trees. All facing the same direction now, their trunks leaning, ever so slightly, toward the van like they were watching too. I got back in, started driving again, this time slower, trying not to panic. My hands shook so badly I had to grip the wheel with both elbows locked. I turned the radio on, just to break the silence. But it only gave static. Then, cutting through the noise, a voice, soft, warped, like it had traveled a long, long way. "You brought him here." I shut it off, slammed my fist against the knob. My own voice broke out of me, ragged, hoarse. "Who the hell is he?" I didn't expect an answer, but I got one. On the dashboard screen, an old LCD I hadn't seen light up in years, a word flickered into view. "Father." Then the screen shorted out. Smoke curled from the edges. I slammed the brakes, the van skidding sideways in the dirt, my heart nearly tearing through my ribs. I sat there, chest heaving, the van ticking with heat and silence. I don't know how long I stayed there, gripping the wheel, staring at the blank screen, but eventually I started driving again. Not toward anything, just away. At least I thought I was. But when the trees finally broke and I saw open ground again, my stomach dropped into my knees. It was the clearing. The same clearing. Same moss-covered stones. Same collapsed fire ring. Same twisted pine leaning over the north side like a crooked sentinel. And in the center, waiting for me, was a new fire, already lit. The smoke rose in slow spirals, unnatural in how steady it climbed despite the still air. No one was around, no footprints, no sign of anyone having walked through. But the fire burned, like it had always been burning. I stepped out against every part of my better judgment. The heat hit me slow, oily, and wrong, not comforting like it should be. It smelled like copper and old wood and something sweet rotting in the sun. At the edge of the ring sat a book, leather-bound, water-damaged, open. I didn't want to touch it, but I couldn't stop my hand like I was in a dream and someone else had control. I knelt down and turned the page. Photos. Dozens. All old, all faded. Families. Solo travelers, all smiling stiffly in front of vans. Most of them Volkswagens. Some Airstreams, one even a beat-up old Winnebago, and always, somewhere in the photo, barely visible in the shadows or deep in the background, the figure, that faceless bark-skinned watcher. He was in all of them. Then I turned to the last page and froze. It was me. Standing in front of my van, same clothes, same dirt on my sleeve from the road, but I hadn't taken that photo. No one had. I had never posed like that. But the photo was there, as real as breath. And behind me, just over my shoulder, closer than ever, he stood, tall, curved, bent like a broken tree. And for the first time, I saw the face, or what was left of one. It was hollow, not burned, not melted, absent, like the face had been removed, scraped out with care, leaving only an emptiness that sucked the light out of the page. I dropped the book. It fell into the fire without making a sound. And that's when I heard it again. A girl's voice whispering just behind me. But this time, it wasn't warning. It was pity. You shouldn't have come alone. I turned, fast, expecting to see her, the girl from the photo, the one with the empty eyes. But she wasn't there. No one was. But on the van's windshield, just beginning to bead in the misty light, another handprint, smaller than the last, fresher, like she'd just been here. I lost it. I screamed, kicked the coals, punched the side of the van until my knuckles split. I didn't care. I wanted pain. I wanted something real, something physical, something human to make sense of any of this. But all I got was more silence. And then the hum, again, closer. So close it felt like it was coming from inside my skull. I dropped to my knees, hands pressed to my ears, heart splintering in my chest. I whispered to myself again and again, "This isn't real. This isn't real. This isn't." But it was. I knew it was, because when I finally looked up, the trees had moved. The entire clearing had changed. The rocks were gone. The van was wrong, bent, warped, and just ahead, maybe 20 feet into the trees, he waited, still, unmoving. But this time, he wasn't alone. The girl stood beside him, and behind them, scattered among the trees like leaves blown by the wind, were dozens more, men, women, children, all with eyes gone empty, all watching me. They didn't move, not at first, just stood there, silhouetted in the mist, dozens of them, lined up among the crooked pines like broken statues. Their faces weren't angry or twisted or snarling. That's what made it worse. They were blank, hollow, like they didn't remember what feeling was. But I felt. Every nerve in my body screamed. I backed up slowly toward the van, not taking my eyes off the tree line, breath shaking, blood roaring in my ears. My feet sunk into the moss like it didn't want to let me go. The girl, if you could even call her that anymore, tilted her head, just a little, as if studying me. Her arms hung limp at her sides, and even from that distance I could tell her mouth was moving. But I couldn't hear anything, just the hum. So loud now it drowned out thought. It buzzed behind my eyes, a vibration that made my jaw ache and my stomach twist, like reality itself was coming undone. I made it to the van, slammed the door shut, locked it. That's when the headlights came on. By themselves. Bright, white, blinding, cutting through the mist like twin spears. But the forest didn't retreat. The people didn't flinch. They moved. All at once. A step forward. Every single one. Perfectly timed. Like a single body, like puppets pulled by the same string. Then another step. Closer. I turned the key. Nothing. The engine clicked, struggled, died. Again. Nothing. Come on, I whispered. Come on. Again. Nothing. They were 10 feet from the clearing now, the girl at the front, her eyes locked on mine, or where her eyes should have been. I reached under the dash, found the override wire, ripped the casing with my teeth, and twisted the copper with shaking fingers. Sparks flew. The engine coughed, stuttered, then roared. The van kicked forward. I didn't look back. Not at the girl, not at the crowd, not even as the trees blurred past in streaks of green and brown. I drove and drove and drove until the forest broke like a fever and the sky opened up and I burst onto a highway I hadn't seen in 2 days. Civilization. Signal bars blinked back to life on my phone, and behind me, nothing, just trees, still, innocent, like none of it ever happened. I drove until the tank ran dry, pulled into a truck stop, sat in the lot for what felt like hours, trying to remember who I was, trying to anchor myself in the mundane. But the forest, it didn't let go. Not really, because when I got out to pump gas, there was something on the rear view. Not carved this time, not painted, just taped there, a slip of paper, yellowed with age, and on it, in letters shaky and slanted, "He's riding with you." I dropped it, burned it, again, drove home, changed numbers, moved apartments, tried to rebuild. But some nights when the world is quiet, when the hum of the city dies and the shadows stretch long down the hallway, I feel him again, that pressure in the chest, that soundless sound, that heat behind the eyes that isn't mine. And I know he's still here. Not outside. Inside. A hitchhiker I didn't mean to pick up. A presence that wears my skin, lives in the silence between heartbeats, and sometimes, just for a second, I swear I see the girl in the mirror, just over my shoulder. Watching. Waiting. Not angry. Just patient. Like she knows something I don't. Like she remembers the promise I made when I stayed. And maybe she's right. Because the truth is, I never really left Appalachia. Not the version I found in those woods. The real version. The older version. The one that doesn't care what your GPS says. The one that bends roads and swallows years. The one that lives between the roots and beneath the stones. The one that sees your van, your tent, your fire, and waits. I used to think horror was loud. Screaming, chases, chaos. But real horror, it's quiet. It's the sound of a forest that stops breathing. It's the moment the air changes and you don't know why, but your body does. It's not seeing something move in the woods. It's knowing that whatever is moving already saw you. That kind of horror sticks. It rewires things. I tried to forget, tried to bury it under life's noise, work, bills, long drives with podcasts and windows down. It worked at first. But only for a while, because the real damage wasn't what I saw out there. It was what I brought back. There's something no one tells you about being alone in the wild with your thoughts long enough. You realize you're not as solid as you thought. You're porous. And the woods, they leak. Little by little, it seeps into the cracks in your certainty, into the corners of your memories, until you're not sure what was real and what wanted to be remembered. And in that liminal space, something else wakes up. Not evil, exactly. Just older, wiser than you, hungrier too. I started dreaming about the clearing, always the same. I'm back at the fire, but this time I don't run, I sit. And the girl sits beside me. Her eyes are empty, but I'm not afraid of her. We don't speak. But I understand her. She's not warning me anymore. She's inviting me, not to join them, to replace her. I wake up with my hands covered in dirt, pine needles in my hair. Once there was ash on my pillow. And last week, I found a photo tucked under my windshield wiper. It was old, faded, a man smiling in front of a Volkswagen, just like me, just like the ones in the book. And behind him, the girl. But she was younger, newer, less hollow, like someone had just arrived. like the cycle had just started again. I checked the back of the photo. One word scrawled in sharp, jagged handwriting. Trade. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was scared, but because I understood. You see, the forest doesn't take you. You give yourself to it, piece by piece. With every night you stay despite the feeling, with every instinct you ignore, with every time you convince yourself nothing's wrong. It waits for those choices, it feeds on them, and it always gives you something back. Some people come back with stories, some come back changed, some don't come back at all. I've told myself that I survived, that I'm safe, that I drove away, I moved on, and that was the end of it. But deep down, I know better, because sometimes I catch myself doing things I don't remember starting. Lighting a candle at sunset, drawing symbols in condensation on the window, walking the perimeter of my apartment 3 times before bed. Once I found a scrap of paper on my kitchen table. No idea where it came from. It just said, "It's almost your turn." And worst of all, there's a map on my wall now. I didn't put it there, but I mark it. Every time I hear about someone going missing in the Appalachian backwoods, every time a van gets found abandoned with the doors open, the campfire still warm, and no sign of who lit it, there are dozens of marks now. And I'm starting to think, that's the real trade. You escape, but only if you promise to guide the next one in, to make the road look safe, to tell your story, to make it sound just plausible enough. So here I am, telling it, because maybe you're planning your own trip soon. Maybe you've been itching for the quiet of a wooded ridge, the crackle of a fire, the hum of cicadas beneath the stars. Just know this, if the trail feels off, it is. If the road loops longer than it should, turn back. If the air falls too still and the sound drains from the world and your own breath feels foreign in your lungs, don't rationalize it. Don't wait for a second sign. The first one was enough. The moment your gut whispered that something was wrong, that was the forest asking. Every second after that is you answering. And the farther you go, the quieter your name gets. Until one day, you forget what it even sounded like. Until you're just another shape in the trees. Another handprint on someone else's van. Another photograph waiting to be found. So camp if you want. Park where the signal drops and the trees grow too thick. But don't say you weren't warned. Don't say you didn't feel it. And if you see her, the girl with the hollow eyes, standing just outside the firelight, don't run. Don't speak. Just close your eyes and pray she isn't looking for someone to trade. I never used to be afraid of silence. Not the kind you find in a city park after dusk, or the brief hush before a thunderstorm. I'm talking about the deep, unbroken kind, the kind that sits so heavy in your ears it feels like something's pressing down on your chest, the kind you don't notice until you realize there's no wind, no bird song, no distant hum of a highway, just stillness. And in that stillness, something waiting. I first felt it near the Alberta-British Columbia border, just west of Jasper. I was traveling alone in my old 1978 Volkswagen Westphalia, the rust-colored kind with pop-up canvas and curtains I stitched myself. I'd been on the road for 6 weeks already, winding up through Washington, then across into Alberta. Most nights were the kind of solitude you dream of. Crackling fires, crisp air, maybe the howl of a coyote way off in the hills. But this was different. The trip had started out as a cleanse. I was coming off a brutal breakup. 5 years with someone who grew to hate the very life I loved. He said he wanted stability. I said I wanted air, space, the quiet of old-growth trees, and the honest creak of wood under tire. So when I left hard, quit my job, sold what I couldn't fit in the van, and pointed my wheels toward Canada. I told myself it was about healing. Maybe that's why I ignored the early signs. I found the spot in a faded camping forum, a boondocking location that promised free camping just off an old logging road near the Icefields Parkway. No cell reception, no formal campsite, just a wide, flat patch near a lake and some dense evergreens that crept up the slopes like they were trying to hide something. Locals called it Widow's Hollow, though no one could agree why. Some said a woman died there. Some said she just left and never came back. Others said she still lived out there, half feral, warning campers to leave. I laughed when I read that part. I shouldn't have. I got to the site in the early evening. The sun was slung low, dragging long shadows across the dirt road. Everything looked normal enough. No signs of other campers, just a wide clearing with a half-collapsed fire ring and the lake glimmering pale blue beyond a thicket of spruce. I backed the van in, threw it into park, and stepped outside. The air smelled like pine needles and old water. Damp earth, but there was something else. Something faint. A sourness just on the edge of smell, like meat gone bad or breath that's been held too long. I shrugged it off. Maybe a dead animal nearby. These things happen, but I should have known better. That was the first silence, the warning one. The second came around midnight. I was half asleep in the back of the van, zipped into my old army surplus sleeping bag, the small propane heater keeping the chill off. Outside, the night had gone completely still. No wind, no insects. Even the usual groan of the van's frame cooling in the night had stopped. That's when I heard it. 3 knocks. Soft, even. Not on the van's door, not on the windows, on the ground, directly underneath me. I held my breath, listening. No more knocks, no movement, just that dead, heavy silence like the earth itself was waiting for something. I told myself it was probably nothing, maybe something shifting in the undercarriage, or maybe an animal, a raccoon maybe. But I'd camped in this van more nights than I could count, and I'd never heard that before. I didn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., the smell came back. Stronger this time, like something rotting in wet burlap. I lit a candle and placed it near the cracked window. The flame flickered strangely, not from a breeze, there wasn't any, but like the air itself was thick, distorted. The next morning, I went outside and checked around the van. No footprints. No signs of wildlife, but just under where I'd parked, someone or something had scratched a set of lines into the dirt. 4 vertical slashes, evenly spaced, maybe 6 inches long. They looked deliberate, almost like tally marks. I told myself again, animals, maybe claws. Bears sometimes do that. But my stomach didn't buy it. I packed quickly, but I didn't leave. I should have, but part of me, the stubborn part, didn't want to admit I was scared. I told myself I came here to face silence, to find peace. I wasn't about to turn tail because of a little weirdness. But that's the trick of places like this. They don't scare you all at once. They wait. They let you rationalize your way deeper in, one uneasy night at a time. That evening, I went down to the lake to wash my face. The water was freezing, but clear. I crouched by the bank, the moss slick under my boots, and cupped my hands. As I splashed my face, I felt it, the sensation of being watched. Not just watched, studied, like something just beyond the trees was trying to decide what I was. I didn't turn around. I didn't move. I just held still, heart hammering, until the feeling passed. When I finally did turn, there was nothing there. But the silence was back, and it was thicker now. Not empty like before, but heavy, like a pressure system had dropped right over the campsite. I didn't cook dinner. I climbed back into the van, locked every door, and tried to distract myself with an old paperback. But my mind kept drifting to the knocks, the smell, the scratches. At 1:42 a.m., I woke up to the sound of dripping. Not rain, not a leak. Dripping metal, slow, deliberate, like something wet sliding down the front of the van. I eased forward, peering through the curtain, but the windshield was bone dry. The sound wasn't outside, it was in the engine bay. I killed the heater, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped outside. The air was ice. I circled to the front of the van and slowly popped the latch. Nothing. No fluid, no animal. But scratched into the dust along the front bumper was a new mark, a 5th slash crossing through the original 4. I don't know why that scared me more than anything else. Maybe because it was the first thing that felt deliberate, like a message, a count. I got back in and drove, right then in the middle of the night. I didn't care about rules or road signs. I turned the ignition and peeled out of that campsite like the devil himself was grabbing at my tires. I didn't stop until I hit the next ranger station on Highway 93, hours later, shaking and wild-eyed. The ranger on duty was a wiry guy in his 60s named Kurt. Said he'd worked that stretch of land for 30 years. When I told him where I'd camped, his face changed. "You saw the marks?" he asked. I nodded. He didn't ask to see them. He didn't laugh. He just sighed. "You shouldn't have stayed past sundown. No one goes there twice." I remember the way Kurt said that, calm without drama, like a man who's had the same conversation too many times to still be afraid, but just enough to stay away. No one goes there twice. I wanted to ask why. I wanted facts, details, names, anything that would make this feel logical. But instead, I just stood there, fists clenched in my coat pockets, waiting for him to say something else. The room around us buzzed with that fluorescent hum that only old ranger stations seem to have, and even in that drab government issue light, I could see the edge of tension in his shoulders. He didn't look at me when he spoke next. "They used to call it Widow's Hollow because a woman lost her husband there, back in the 50s. Logging accident, they said. Except folks said it wasn't no accident. Said he walked himself right into the path of a falling pine. Just stood there, staring, like he heard something none of us could." Kurt rubbed his jaw and turned toward the radio on the desk, though he didn't touch it. Couple years later, 2 campers vanished, left their van, gear, even the fire still burning, like they just stepped out for a moment. We never found them. Hell, I was on that search team. It's why I won't set foot past marker 19 anymore. I finally found my voice. "But what is it? What's out there?" Kurt glanced at me, and there was something in his eyes, not fear exactly, something heavier, like regret, like shame. "I don't know," he said. "But it wants you to stay, wants you to forget time, forget reason. It gets in your head, makes you doubt things, makes you see people who ain't there, hear things you're sure shouldn't be there." He took a beat, and if you ignore it, if you try to leave too late. He didn't finish that sentence. He didn't have to. I sat in the van for a long time afterward, engine off, hands on the steering wheel, listening to the ping of cooling metal and trying not to think about the slashes on my bumper. I should have driven south, headed back across the border and left that whole stretch of Canada in my rearview mirror. But I didn't. I told myself I'd be safe if I stayed on main roads, stayed near people. Fear can do that to you, play tricks with your reasoning, make you bargain with your own instincts. The next night, I checked into a small campground just outside Banff. Well lit, populated, families laughing around fire pits, a father teaching his daughter how to toast a marshmallow. I remember thinking, this is the opposite of Widow's Hollow. This is safe. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of fear, because of noise. I kept hearing whispers. Not outside, inside the van. Soft, overlapping voices, like a radio on low volume behind the cabinets. They spoke in a language I didn't recognize. And beneath the whispers, I heard the knocking again. Not from beneath me this time. From behind the wall panels. Like something inside the structure of the van was tapping. Waiting. I threw open the side door and stumbled out, bare feet on gravel. The night air hit me like a slap, but I didn't care. I turned back to the van, flashlight shaking in my hand, and shined it across the body. And there it was, a 6th mark. This one higher, scratched along the edge of the pop-top canvas, as if whatever had made it was climbing. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there, chest rising and falling in tight, shallow breaths, as the whispers faded like mist in the wind. The next day, I drove straight to a mechanic in Canmore. Didn't tell them why, just asked for a full inspection. Engine, undercarriage, bodywork. I sat in the lobby while a kid in greasy coveralls climbed under the van with a flashlight and a clipboard. He came back 40 minutes later, frowning. "You store food in the walls or something?" I blinked. "What?" "There's something organic in the back paneling. We can't get to it without tearing out your insulation." "Bells. Bad." I let out a laugh that cracked in the middle, sharp and brittle. "No, I don't store anything in the walls." He just looked at me for a moment, like maybe he didn't believe me, or worse, like he did. I paid in cash and didn't ask for a receipt. That night, I stayed in a hotel. Real bed, 4 walls, locked doors. But sleep didn't come. Not because of noise, because of absence. I couldn't hear the hum of the heater, the drip of the bathroom sink. Nothing. And in that silence, I realized the truth. I'd brought it with me. Whatever lived in Widow's Hollow, it had followed me. Hitched a ride inside the walls of my van, or maybe even deeper, inside my memory. Inside the part of me that opened when I let my guard down. That thought I could find peace in the wilderness. That silence I'd once craved. It had changed. It wasn't stillness anymore. It was presence. It was waiting. And it was getting closer. I stayed on the move after that. Didn't spend more than a night in one place. Sometimes not even that. I'd pull off into a gas station lot, wedge the van between 2 semi-trailers, and pretend the diesel rumble was enough to drown out whatever I thought might still be crawling behind the panels. But no matter where I went, I'd wake up to the same thing. The smell. That awful, thick, rotted breath that didn't belong to any living animal. Not quite death, not quite decay. More like something ancient trying to imitate those things, like a memory of rot. Each time, it grew stronger, and with it came the whispers, not words anymore, just emotion, cold, hunger, want. I started to dream about the slashes. In the dreams, I wasn't driving anymore. I was standing at the edge of that same lake, barefoot, watching my reflection ripple in the black water. Behind me, trees rustled, not from wind, but from movement. Heavy, rhythmic, like something massive shifting its weight from foot to foot, waiting for me to turn around. When I finally did, there'd be nothing there, just a shadow falling the wrong direction. Every morning after those dreams, I'd check the van. More marks, more scratches, 7, 8, 9. Once they were inside, on the cabinets just beneath the sink. I tried to ignore it, rationalize it. Maybe I scratched it by accident. Maybe I'd done it in my sleep, in some sleepwalking episode I didn't remember. But when I woke up with dirt under my fingernails and a faint smear of blood on my palm, that theory crumbled fast. The mechanic in Golden, BC didn't want to touch the van. He poked his head in, sniffed once, and backed away like he'd felt heat pouring off a stove. "You need to get rid of this thing," he muttered. "There's something wrong with it." I laughed. A sharp, broken sound. "You think I don't know that?" He didn't respond. Just wiped his hands on a rag and walked back into the shop. That night, I booked a ferry. I told myself it would break the cycle, crossing water, putting physical distance between me and Widow's Hollow. Some old folklore logic. Evil can't cross running water, right? So I boarded at Horseshoe Bay and sailed out toward Vancouver Island. It was foggy that night, dense, wet air pressing in from all sides, turning the boat's horn into a wailing ghost. I stood on the upper deck, arms tucked into my coat, staring at the swirling gray, hoping I'd feel something like relief. Instead, I heard the whisper. Right behind me. Clear. Purposeful. "You shouldn't have left." I spun around. No one. I checked the railing, the lifeboats, even the shadowed doorway to the interior cabin. But I was alone. I slept in the van again that night, parked on the shoulder of a road near Tofino. Remote, but not silent. The ocean was just out of view, and I could hear waves crashing. It helped, gave me something to focus on that wasn't breath or tapping or the rising drumbeat of my own panic. I almost made it through the night. Almost. At 3:12 a.m., I woke up choking. The van was full of smoke. Not from a fire, from steam. Hot, damp air rolling out of the vents, thick enough to bead on the walls and fog the glass. The heater was off. I scrambled for the door handle, flung it open, and fell out onto the gravel, gasping. The air outside was clean, cold, real. When I turned back to look at the van, the inside was clear again. No steam, no fog, no sign of anything. I didn't go back in. I spent the rest of the night on a driftwood log near the beach, wrapped in a blanket, shivering and watching the tide roll in like it might carry something with it. Something tall and wrong. By sunrise, I knew I had to do it. I had to go back. Not because I wanted to, but because I realized something out there in Widow's Hollow had claimed a part of me. And it wasn't going to let go until I gave it what it wanted. Maybe just acknowledging it had been the mistake. Maybe by trying to escape it, I'd only made it hungrier. I needed to know, needed to see it, face it, even if it not coming back. The drive back to Widow's Hollow felt longer than before, like the road had stretched itself in defiance, resisting me mile after mile. Trees leaned closer to the shoulder. Fog clung to the high pines like it didn't want to let go. Even the sky looked different, washed out gray, no depth, no sun. Just a flat, oppressive ceiling pressing down. I didn't sleep the night before I went in. Couldn't. I just sat in the front seat, engine idling, hands on the wheel, staring through the windshield at the narrow gravel track ahead. The same track I'd taken weeks ago. The same one that had started everything. The trees looked the same, but I wasn't. There was a shift in me now. A surrender, maybe. Or just resolve. That dull, sharp line people cross when fear is no longer something you run from, when it becomes the path itself. The silence deepened the farther I went. No birds, no insects, not even wind, just the slow gravel crunch under my tires and the distant rhythmic knock, knock, knock that returned as soon as I passed marker 19. Kurt had said no one goes past it twice, and yet there I was. I parked where the road curved into the clearing and cut the engine. The moment the van went silent, I heard it. Breathing. Not mine. It came from the trees. Low, wet, like lungs that hadn't tasted air in years. I opened the door slowly, every muscle screaming at me to run, but I didn't. I stepped out, boots hitting damp dirt, and turned toward the tree line. "Come on," I said out loud, my voice a whisper broken by wind. "Let's finish this." Nothing moved, nothing answered. The forest just watched. I walked toward the lake. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the earth itself had thickened, turned to mud beneath my boots. My breath came in sharp, shallow pulls. Cold sweat trickled down my back. The trees swayed slightly, but not in rhythm. It was more like a slow shiver, passing from trunk to trunk, like a message. By the time I reached the water's edge, I could feel it in my skull, a pressure, like altitude sickness, or sound too low to hear, but deep enough to rattle bone. I looked out across the lake and saw myself, my reflection, but not quite. It stood still as glass, even though I was trembling. The eyes were wrong, too wide, too still. Like the water was remembering me, not mirroring me. I stepped closer and the reflection smiled. I stumbled back, fell to my knees. And then the lake, brat. There's no other word for it. The surface expanded, rippling outward, and let out a slow exhale that smelled of iron and wet soil. Then the whispers came again, louder, closer. "You heard us. You let us in." The voice wasn't human. It wasn't even sound. It was inside me. I clutched my head, but there was no pain, just images, flashes, the loggers, the campers, the woman whose husband had stood frozen beneath the falling pine. They'd all been called, just like me, and each had stayed. Something moved behind me. I spun around, heart pounding. The trees opened, not parted, opened, like ribs, and from within them stepped a figure, tall, gaunt, not masked but faceless. Its skin was the color of bark, its limbs jointed wrong, like it was mimicking the shape of a man and failing. It didn't walk. It flowed. Closer, closer. I backed toward the lake. The water whispered, "Stay." The figure reached the edge of the clearing, and for the first time I felt it fully, not just fear. Recognition. I knew this thing. It wasn't from here. It was of here. Born of silence, of solitude, of the empty places in the world where no one looks, no one speaks, no one remembers. And in that moment I understood the truth. It didn't follow me. I brought it, carried it like a sickness. Maybe it needed a witness. Maybe it needed to be known. Maybe that was the trap all along. The thing reached out a hand long, too long, and I saw my own fingers mirrored in its form. That's when the sound changed. The knocking. It wasn't behind me anymore. It was inside me, my ribs, my spine, my mind. A slow, deliberate hello or goodbye. I don't remember making the decision to run. I just remember the feeling of my boots pounding into the earth, lungs burning, heart slamming, the trees bending toward me like they wanted to close around me and keep me forever. I made it back to the van, keys in hand, door open, engine screaming to life. I reversed so hard the tires lifted and slammed back down. Dirt sprayed. The forest screamed. Or maybe I did. I don't know. All I know is I drove. Faster than I should have. Faster than the road could handle. Branches slapped the windows. Rocks spat up under the chassis. But I didn't stop. Not until I saw the highway. Not until the trees ended. Not until I crossed back over marker 19 and suddenly the world had sound again. Birds, wind, the low hum of a plane overhead. I pulled over, killed the engine, sat there, staring at my hands on the wheel, still shaking, still sweating, but alive and alone. Or so I thought. It's been months now. I haven't gone back to Canada, haven't taken the van past the northern edge of Washington. I avoid dense forests. I sleep in open fields when I can, or under the glow of gas station lights. I keep the windows cracked just enough to hear the world outside, the real world. Cars passing, dogs barking, crickets singing. Sometimes I still hear the knocking, faint, in the cabinets, in the frame of my bed. In my own chest when I lay down and silence creeps in. But it's softer now. Like it's waiting, like it knows it doesn't have to chase me anymore. That eventually I'll go back, because something in me is still tethered to that hollow. It's hard to explain this to people who've never lived in a van, never followed that winding call through the trees with only canvas and tin between them and the wild. They think fear is loud, screaming, flashing, no blood on the floor. But fear like this, the real kind, it's quiet. It's the realization that silence has layers, and one of them is watching you. Every time I talk about what happened, I feel like I'm diluting it, making it safer, cleaner, easier for someone else to digest. But there's no safe way to tell the truth about Widow's Hollow. No easy version of the thing I met in those woods. And if I'm being honest, I'm not sure I met it. I think I became it, or part of me did. The part that longed for stillness too much. That craved silence so deeply it forgot how to listen to danger, that whispered to itself that being alone was peace, even when it was really surrender. I've thought a lot about Kurt since then, about how he looked at me when he said, "No one goes there twice." I think he didn't mean the place. I think he meant themselves. No one comes back from that hollow the same. Maybe some folks never leave it at all. Maybe that's why the people disappear. Not because they're taken, but because they become part of the silence. Part of the thing that watches from the edge of the lake. Part of the rhythm that waits for the next lonely driver, the next tired camper who just wants a quiet night and a sky full of stars. I still have the van. I've thought about selling it. More than once, I've put the ad up, posted the photos, written the mileage and the "no rust, runs great" caption with a little smiley face, trying to pretend it's just a vehicle, just a way to get from point A to point B. But then I delete it, because I know what lives in it now, not physically, not anymore, but in the echoes, in the memories pressed into the fabric of the cushions, in the condensation that forms on the window no matter how dry the air, in the 10th scratch I never saw but always felt. You learn to live with it, the fear, the knowing. You learn that there are places in the world that do not want to be camped in, that do not want your songs, your stories, your lantern light flickering beneath the canopy. Some places don't want you to visit. They want you to join. And you learn, if you listen carefully enough, that not all silence is absence. Some of it is presence. Patient, humming, alive. When I close my eyes now, I don't see the hollow. I see the reflection in the lake. Standing still when I was shaking, smiling when I wanted to scream. And I wonder, if I'd stayed just one more night, if I'd waited a moment longer before turning the key, would that have become me? Would I be the one waiting now, watching the road, listening for tires on gravel, marking time with slashes on the door frame? I don't have answers, only the truth I lived. So if you find yourself deep in the woods one day, van parked, campfire low, the world finally still, and you feel a silence settle around you that doesn't feel quite right. If the trees sway when there's no wind, if you hear breathing that isn't yours, if you see your reflection in the lake and it doesn't blink when you do, get in the van, start the engine, and don't look back. because once the hollow sees you, it remembers, and one way or another, it will call you home.